This meeting will be recorded.
Yeah, okay. Dear colleagues and friends, all national focal points for periodic reporting and World Heritage Site managers across the Asia-Pacific region, colleagues from the advisory bodies to the World Heritage Committee, ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICROM, UNESCO Field Office colleagues, World Heritage Category 2 Center representatives, Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all. I'm Dr. Feng Jin, Chief of Asia Pacific Unit of the World Heritage Center, speaking from UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Welcome to all and thank you for attending the 12th Thursday morning training session organized by the World Heritage Center for periodical reporting exercise in Asia and the Pacific region. This is one of the last in-depth sessions, and we wanted to dedicate some time to addressing the questions about two important aspects of the World Heritage Management, the World Heritage Management Plans, and impact assessment. Today's topic will include reporting on management plans and impact assessments in periodical reporting questionnaire, requirements for management plans under the 1972 Convention, management documents for different types of heritage, integrating management plans with what other management documents, what are the heritage impact assessment, environment impact assessments, and the strategic environmental assessment, when to commission impact assessments, how to integrate OUV into assessments. And of course, with some working tools like ICOMOS guidance, IUCN advice note, and next steps for guidance document. Of course, we will also introduce some good practice examples for management plans and impact assessment. In addition to being topics raised on in several parts of periodical reporting questionnaire, these are key components for good management that are underlined by the World Heritage Committee when it reviews either the nomination dossier or the state of conservation of many properties, both positively when steps have been undertaken in due course and have helped ensure the safeguarding of a property's outstanding universal value, and negatively when decisions have been made without sufficient coordination or consideration given to the protection of the property's OUV. As we all know, capacity building, education, and knowledge sharing are crucial components for successful implementation of the World Heritage Convention by all stakeholders. Capacity building is actually one of the 4 initial strategic objectives adopted by the World Heritage Committee in 2002 and complemented by a 5th C in 2007 to acknowledge the important role of communities in the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. The World Heritage Capacity Building Strategy was adopted by the committee in 2011. The strategy was developed by the World Heritage Center, ICROM, IUCN, ICOMOS, and other capacity building partners, such as Category 2 centers under the auspices of UNESCO in various regions of the world. As part of knowledge sharing of the World Heritage Leadership Program, a guidance on impact assessment for World Heritage properties is currently under development. So considering the upcoming 10 years anniversary, the World Heritage Committee will consider a results-based evaluation of the strategy and update the post-2020 strategic framework on capacity building. So I'm very happy also to speak in my capacity as coordinator for the World Heritage Capacity Building Program. So in this context, to help us look closely at questions of management documents and impact assessment, I'm very happy to have some dear colleagues and friends to join us today, in addition to the APA periodical reporting team that you have got to know during these sessions since last September. So we have Mrs. Irene Jun, representing ICROM, Ms. Mizuki Murai, representing IUCN, and Mr. Richard Maki, representing ICOMOS International. My colleagues from the World Heritage Center will also deliver a brief presentation on the background of management plans and impact assessments within the questionnaire and in the key text of the convention, such as the operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. In addition, I'm very happy to have with us today representatives from the two of our Category 2 centers, Ms. Marie-Noëlle Dourneau from the World Heritage Institute of Training and Research, WETRAP China, and Dr. Gutman and Mr. Kakati from the Wildlife Institute of India, who will present some highlights of their work relating to the topics we are discussing today. At the end of the session, we have planned some time to open the floor and respond to questions from the participants, and all presenters will be available to answer your questions. As in previous weeks, this session will be recorded and the video and the presentation materials shared with the site managers after the session. Since this topic is also very relevant to the World Heritage site managers, we have invited site managers to join us for this session. As before, we strongly encourage and invite encourage the national focal points, share the recording and the presentation materials with the site managers after the sessions as well, especially as they may not have been available to attend the live event. Also, to ensure better information circulation, we are also considering of establishing WhatsApp group and other social media means to provide assistance to the national focal points and site managers across the Asia-Pacific region. Let me take this opportunity to express again my thanks to the Republic of Korea, whose support via their funds in trust agreement with UNESCO makes these training sessions and the close follow-up of the periodical reporting exercise possible. And now I'll pass the floor to my colleagues from the World Heritage Center, Ms. Akane Nakamura and Mr. Anadol Uday Deodat, who will update us on the progress of the exercise and provide us with an introduction to today's topics. Thank you. Akane and Anadol, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Fang, and good morning to everyone. Let me start with a quick catch-up on the progress of the exercise and a word of thanks to all of our national focal points. We have had a lot of high levels of completion rate following the early completion deadline for section 1 at the end of January, and we're very grateful for this. And all of our reviewers are now busy looking at the questionnaires and at the answers that you have provided. So thank you very much. And as we had discussed and agreed, They will be in touch if needed on a case-by-case basis directly with you if there are any questions that they feel might need a bit more work or might need additional information. So this will be occurring over the next couple of months gradually, but thank you very much. For those of you who have not yet reached the highest percentages, do not worry, you still have plenty of time. Just work on it at your leisure and don't hesitate to get in touch with us directly if you have any question. If my colleagues can put in the chat directly our email address for the periodic reporting exercise, which is wh-periodicreporting@unesco.org. That would be great. So if you have any question, don't hesitate to send it directly to us and we'll be very happy to answer you. I wanted to begin today with a very quick look at what management and to some extent impact assessments, but mostly management questions look like in Section 2 questionnaires, which concern site managers and therefore also national focal points who will need to review the Section 2 questionnaires. And so let me share my screen. I'll just guide you through the relevant sections. This isn't a dedicated chapter as such, but it is a recurring question that is going through the questionnaire for you. For some reason it doesn't want to let me share.
I'll just take this pause moment to just mention to everyone, yes, the quality of the speakers may decline depending on if you all have your videos on. So please keep your videos off, and that will most likely improve your connection, and we will make sure to address these issues as they come up. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Just to have a look, so if, as a quick reminder, the navigation bar is at the top of your reporting window. We are here on the World Heritage Center's website in the periodic reporting platform, and that little button will give you access to your navigation. And let's start by having a look at question 5.3. Is management systems and management plans. This is perhaps the most substantial reporting section on the question of management plans and documents that you have in the entire questionnaire. But as I said, and as we will see, there are a couple of other places as well. This is a relevant question. So let's just briefly go through all of this. As a reminder, you always have a guidance tab that gives you access to some short clarifications, sometimes more substantial clarifications on the question, as well as the key terms that are used in this specific question. This is extracted from our guidance documents and it matches the list of key terms that is available as a separate PDF on our website as well, and that gives you some background on what some of the words mean when they're used in the context of the World Heritage Convention. And so if for question 531, you are asked to check the boxes which most closely match the character of the governance and management system of the property. This is a relatively general question. This is one of our choice boxes. I believe you only have one choice. And you can see I'm here on the demo version of our questionnaire. And you have a number of choices and you get to pick whichever one is closest to what is the case for the individual property that you are reporting on. And in the case of serial properties, obviously adapt as needed and don't hesitate to use others if that is required. Question 532 asks you which of the management tools listed are used to protect the property. Now, hopefully many of you have a statutory management plan, a zoning plan for the property, and then you have a number of other choices. such as traditional ways of management, government mechanisms that foster and respect traditional practices, which has been for a long time now a focus of the convention as well, and a number of other practices or frameworks that are a target for the World Heritage Property or the area in which the World Heritage Property is located. We'll come back to the question of visitor and visitation management plans. As always, you have comment boxes throughout the questionnaire to give perhaps a closer or more in-depth look at what is occurring at the property. These are somewhat limited in word count, but we've made it enough usually that you can concisely but clearly explain the situation if needed. The question 534, for which this questionnaire in particular is a bad example because it is not a real property. If there are any documents that have been transmitted to the World Heritage Center and are in our database, they will be in this space here, and you will have to either validate or update. And if you update, you will need to provide a comment as well as to what you need to update, and then follow up with us essentially through the usual channels, which means that send to the World Heritage Center the documents in question so that they can be reviewed and uploaded to our website. But this will be a screenshot of the information and the documents that we have on file for the property in question. Then you have a number of questions about the implementation of specific recommendations and policy texts in the management of the property, starting with the 2011 recommendation on the historic urban landscape, or the whole recommendation, with which we may very well talk about again today, and we'll definitely talk about in our next session on the 25th of March, which is half of which is dedicated to urban heritage. And the same goes for the 2015 policy documents on the, the policy document on the impacts of climate change, which is 2006, and whether or not this is in use for the property. It's depending on the nature of the property as well. This will have an impact, but we would like to take this opportunity to remind you that climate change also impacts cultural properties very largely these days, unfortunately. So it is not exclusively reserved for natural properties by any means. There is the same question as well on the strategy for reducing risks from disasters at World Heritage properties. You are also asked to rate coordination levels between levels of administration involved in the management of the property, all of which will be picked up later on, and we will see how in Chapter 11. An important question is question 5312, which asks you whether the management system is adequate to maintain the property's outstanding universal value. As you know, the outstanding universal value is the reason why the property is inscribed on the World Heritage List in the first place, and it should be the cornerstone of a management plan for a World Heritage property. This should be the starting point and the end point of the plan, and so it should be placed at the center. This may also be work that is in progress at a number of properties. This has been notably, for the Asia-Pacific region, one of the key outcomes and to-dos arising from both the first and the second cycles of periodic reporting, to say that management plans needed a lot of attention and perhaps needed revising. So I'm sure that many of you have done substantial work on this question. You're asked to indicate whether and to what extent the management system that is in existence for the property is being implemented, whether there are annual work plans that are implemented, and again, an important question, which groups are included in formal mechanisms and procedures that ensure the participation and contribution of a number of groups that are or can be stakeholders in the World Heritage property or the buffer zone in management decisions to maintain the property, and you have an entire list, and it is a rating scale, as you can see, from not applicable all the way to transformative participation. And there's, of course, for us these days, because it is a strategic priority of the committee, an emphasis on communities, local communities, and especially indigenous peoples. If there are any within the property, we strongly encourage that they participate in the management plans. And if you ever need any guidance or support in that regard, feel free to reach out to us as well. And I'm sure that our colleagues from the advisory bodies will have much to say about this as well in their presentations. You'll be asked to rate the cooperation between the World Heritage Property Management and a number of groups as well. You will also be asked to rate the extent to which the management system for the property contributes towards achieving the 2015 policy for the integration of a sustainable development perspective into the processes of the World Heritage Convention, for which you have a link as well in the guidance, I believe. And you have a number of questions specifically to see whether the targets have been hit. And then you have the opportunity to provide some further details on this. And as with every chapter, you have a question that allows you to give comments, or conclusions, or recommendations related to the management system or management plan. Again, sometimes rating scales don't allow you to fully express what you wish or what the reality of the property is, and so this is a good opportunity to very concisely specify it as well. As you can see on our example here, you can do so in either English or French, the two working languages of the convention. And if it's the agreement that you have reached at the national level, of course, you can fill it out in your national languages and have this translated at the end of the process. This is down to the internal arrangements that you have with the national focal points. One point of specification: please don't hesitate to save on a regular basis. The platform is busy, especially at this time of year, and you wouldn't want to lose your work on an entire page like this, especially a big question like 5.3. So please make sure to save on a regular basis what you do on your questionnaire. Very briefly, because time is running and I actually have a few more things to cover, there are a couple of other chapters that cover management questions. Chapter 9 on visitor management is obviously a big topic as well. There are a couple of questions that are especially relevant to management plans, which are 9.7, which asks you whether the management system for the World Heritage Property includes a strategy to manage visitor tourism activity and its direct economic, sociocultural, and environmental impacts. This is something that we have laid quite a bit of emphasis at the World Heritage Center as well, in the face of at least pre-COVID growing tourism rates and over-tourism at some properties and so on. So this is an important question. And then there's an entire section on monitoring of visitor, which should be part of a management plan or management arrangements as well. How and to what extent the visitor management and other aspects are monitored, and how effective that monitoring is, and who is involved in it. And there is also one important question at 9.14 that I had highlighted for myself, which is to what extent does the visitor and tourism revenue contribute to the management of the World Heritage Property, which is an information that is relatively hard for us to have. So we look forward to your answers on this, to see to what extent exactly in the APA region tourism revenue flows into the management of the property directly or indirectly. And so we're looking forward to your answers on this. Another point that I wanted to highlight is from chapter 10, which is on monitoring itself. As I have said, this is something that is usually highlighted or outlined in the management plans, and to what extent this occurs. This is also a chapter that is relatively thorough on a lot of questions, which goes from the progress that has been made to address the management needs of the property, to whether or not you have defined monitoring indicators and which they are, and whether they are following the principal aspects of the property, especially its OUV, and which groups are involved in the monitoring of the property as well. Here again, you have to rate the level of involvement in monitoring of a number of groups. Usually, these are provisions that should be also provided for in the management plans. But I'm sure that our AB colleagues will have something to say about this. One last point on the questionnaire before I move on to a quick look at why we're doing all of this and why we're asking all of these questions is on chapter 11. As I'm sure that many of you know, having already talked about the section 2 questionnaires, chapter 11 aggregates your answers from a number of previous chapters, as you can see, and asks you to identify priority management needs. So basically all questions that indicate that something could be improved, as you have answered the questionnaire, it picks out some of them and asks you to select up to 10. And here you can see from the answers that have been given in our demo version of the questionnaire that I'm using right now, chapter 5.3, that we have looked at earlier, there are a number of points where, you know, only some use has been made of the whole recommendation or the policy document on the impacts and climate change and so on. So all of these questions will be picked up and placed into chapter 11 automatically by the questionnaire. And what you have to do is tick boxes or untick them to select your 10 priorities, and then the chapter moves on. And so this is a good opportunity if you want, or if you think that one of the priorities for the World Heritage property is to deal with management questions, this is a very good opportunity to do so and to address these. And then there are a number of follow-up questions once you've selected your priorities, and the national focal points will be very familiar with the system already, because we have the same structure for chapter 13 in section 1, which also does the same pickup. Let me have a quick look with you at something if this wants to do what I'm asking. So we've had a look at our chapters. This will be shared with you as well after the fact. Both the video and the presentations that we are all using will all be shared with the national focal point, as Fang mentioned earlier, before we pass it on. A quick look at why we ask all of these questions and why management plans are important to us. The operational guidelines for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention highlight very heavily the role and the importance of management plans. Paragraph 108 tells us that each nominated property should have an appropriate management plan or other document, which must specify how the outstanding universal value of the property should be preserved, preferably through participatory means. So there are a lot of things in there, but mostly the idea is that every property should have a management plan, and that the outstanding universal value should be the starting point of all of it. And as a reminder, paragraph 109 tells us that the purpose of the management system is to ensure the effective protection of the nominated property or the inscribed property, in fact, for present and future generations, which is the overall objective of the 1972 convention, and therefore should also be that of the management plan. On, it lets me. Paragraph 117 reminds us that states parties are responsible for implementing effective management activities at a World Heritage property. Obviously, that's well within your sovereign rights and duties under the conventions, and that states parties should do so in close collaboration with property managers, the agency with management authorities, local communities, and indigenous peoples, rights holders, and stakeholders in property management. And so management should not, under the 1972 convention, be a top-down exercise, rather it should be participatory. And this is already inscribed in the core texts of the convention and in the operational guidelines. There should therefore be equitable government arrangements and collaborative management systems, notably, that are developed as part of your management systems and management plans. And paragraph 118 also recommends that states parties include disaster, climate change, and other risk preparedness as elements in their World Heritage Site management plans and training strategies. We have a number of resources for this, as you have seen. There are policy documents. There are also guidance materials that we will doubtlessly talk about again today, and that you can always find on our website whc.unesco.org, and where you can use as reference points if you are trying to set up a management plan or revising a management plan. This is a good opportunity to look into all of these resources again. Paragraph 110 covers another core aspect, that we ask fewer questions about in the questionnaire, because the questionnaire covers the property as a whole and not specific projects or happenings, but that is very, very important for the follow-up of the state of conservation of properties, notably by the World Heritage Committee, but also in the exchanges and the regular exchanges with the World Heritage Center. And it reminds us, therefore, in para 110, that impact assessments for proposed interventions are essential for all World Heritage properties, and we can confirm from the many, many cases that we see every year that they are indeed absolutely crucial, and that the earlier they are done, the better it is for everybody involved. And there are a number of different types of impact assessments, which we will discuss later today in more details. But paragraph 118 bis reminds us that environmental impact assessments, heritage impact assessments, and/or strategic environmental assessments should be carried out as a prerequisite for development projects and activities that are planned within or around the World Heritage properties. And the notion of prerequisite is perhaps one of the very important parts of this, because we'll see that the timeliness of these assessments is crucial, that doing them after the fact is not nearly as useful as doing them well upstream of project development and project implementation. And that this allows for sufficient consultation with everyone to ensure that the OUV of properties is protected. But it also serves, as paragraph 118 tells us, to identify development alternatives, as well as both potential positive and negative impacts on the outstanding universal value of the property. Because an important thing to note about a lot of projects is that they aren't necessarily going to be entirely negative or, threaten the OUV of the property. In fact, a number of projects could have very positive impacts on the OUV if they are done well, or there could be ways of mitigating necessary changes to the property or its surroundings and conserve the outstanding universal value. So the earlier this discussion is engaged, the better, but I'm sure you'll hear much more about this. There's a recent decision of the World Heritage Committee that was taken in Manama, which welcomes the increasing use of heritage impact assessments and stresses the necessity for these heritage impact assessments and environmental impact assessments to be proportional to the scope and scale of the projects. And there's a growing trend as well, or a growing need for larger projects to also benefit from what I call strategic environmental assessments, which have as their goal the idea of assessing the compound impacts of a project. And we'll just come back to this very briefly later on before I hand over to the advisory bodies. What's important in this decision is, as you can see in paragraph 37 here, that these assessments, the committee requests that these assessments be undertaken in a timely fashion and submitted to the World Heritage Center for review by the advisory bodies as part of notifications made under paragraph 172 of the operational guidelines. And it reiterates that HIAs and EIAs should include a dedicated section examining the potential impact of projects on the OUV of the property in accordance with the guidance documents that Fang already mentioned and that we will hear more about later on. Obviously, we need as much detail of the project about the project as possible in these assessments as well. Just as a quick reminder, paragraph 172 of the operational guidelines invites states parties to inform the committee through the Secretariat, meaning the World Heritage Center, of their intention to undertake or authorize in an area protected under the Convention major restorations or new constructions which may affect the OUV of the property, and that it highlights as well that notice should be given as soon as possible and before making any decisions that would be difficult to reverse. And this is something that the committee brings up time and time again as it reviews state of conservation issues or questions during its annual sessions. It is to say that the earlier notice is given, the lower the likelihood of encountering problems after the fact, or as projects are already ongoing, and that's why we heartily encourage dialogue, early dialogue with the center and the advisory bodies. The e-commerce guidance IUCN and advice notes can be found both on our advisory bodies' websites. They are also on our website at the World Heritage Center, and you're very, very warmly encouraged to have a look at them if you haven't already. I think that provides a very good framework on how, when to prepare the impact assessments, and we'll have another look as well at the future of this. And just one last word before I hand over on SCAs, at least to get this started, that this is part of the same committee decision 42-7 from 2018 from the World Heritage Committee, where the committee requested that states parties ensure that potential impact of large-scale development on the OUV of World Heritage properties should be assessed through strategic environmental assessments at an early stage in the development of the overall project. So this targets especially projects that go far beyond just the World Heritage property itself, and that may cover a much bigger area or be part of much larger infrastructure or sort of large-scale projects in general, before locations or routes have been fixed and prior to any approvals being given. The idea being that mitigation measures or small changes are easier to discuss in the very early planning stages than they are once things have progressed significantly. And we have noted that there's an increasing need for strategic environmental assessments, which cover all types of properties, to measure indirect and cumulative impacts of large-scale projects on the World Heritage property, especially in those cases where projects may not directly target the inside of a property, but may still have significant impacts on the properties. And with that, I'm very happy to be able to hand it over to our colleagues from the advisory bodies. And I will attempt to end this presentation if the thing lets me. Very good. And I see, so I'm very happy to hand over to Eugene Zhou, Misuki Murai, and Richard McKay from respectively ECOM, IUCN, and e-commerce, who will take you through their view on management plans and impact assessments, and we will see each other again at the end of the session. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to the advisory bodies. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anatole. And can I firstly just confirm that you can hear me? It's Richard McKay from ECOMOS speaking.
Yes, we can, Richard.
And I've now shared my screen. Can you see the screen with the first slide?
Absolutely.
Look, for each of these ensuing sections, the three advisory bodies are collaborating, and I'm pleased to commence in relation to the management plans for World Heritage properties.
Sorry, Richard, just quickly, we can see the presentation, but not in presentation mode.
Well, why is that?
Teams sometimes does some strange things. You may have to share your desktop directly and then go into full screen.
Okay. So
if you have the desktop option, just go ahead and click desktop when sharing screen.
I can't, I'm sorry, I cannot. Oh, here we are, desktop.
Mm-hmm.
My apologies about this, colleagues. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, full screen worked perfectly fine. Just go one slide just to make sure it still works. Perfect, thanks.
Thank you, and apologies to my colleagues. As Anatole has outlined, the basis for management plans is well established through the convention and its operational guidelines, which require a range of things: protection, conservation and presentation of values, integrating the project into comprehensive planning, giving World Heritage a life in the community, strengthening appreciation through education and information, keeping the community informed and adopting a range of measures. A lot of this is embodied in Article 4, but a management plan is an effective mechanism for acquitting these convention obligations. And as has been emphasised, management of World Heritage properties is absolutely integral to their outstanding universal value. And in that respect, the statement of outstanding universal value or the retrospective statement may be critical. And an error that's often made is to ignore the fact that the values of the property, the attributes that contribute to OUV, include all three pillars: integrity, authenticity and protection and management, not just the criteria under which a property is inscribed. So therefore, management of World Heritage has a primary objective to retain, conserve and transmit the outstanding universal value. Now, there are multiple approaches to management plans, and the advisory bodies do not advocate a one-size-fits-all. It's very necessary that management plans fit into the relevant statutory and administrative arrangements in the particular state, and it's also important that the approach to the management plans reflect the circumstances of the property. But as Anatole has also indicated, there are a vast array of support resources available on the websites of the advisory bodies and the World Heritage Centre. What I would like to emphasise, and being Australian, I'm of course mentioning an Australian document being the Borough Charter, is that irrespective of the framework that you use, there is a core logic, and it is particularly on the left-hand side of this slide. So while the middle and the right-hand side might deal with the specifics of how the Borough Charter works to develop management plans, the core process is to assess the values of the property, to identify the issues, and then to develop policies and manage the property to retain the values. And so this is at the core of successful management planning and management plan preparation. And I emphasise that this can be culturally customised, and to illustrate that point, I put up an example here. It happens to be Cambodian and therefore reflected in Khmer as well as English, but it's a similar process that looks at understanding the issues, identifying the values, and then preparing appropriate policy and action responses. So the core logic is the same, the content is effectively the same, and the intent is the same. So what I'll endeavour to cover in the remaining part of this first presentation is the what, why and how. Why plans are needed, what they should do, what they contain, who should be involved, the process and the timing, and finally the implementation. So firstly, why do we need management plans for World Heritage property? And the short answer is as a guide to decision making, to know where we are heading, to enable the protection of their outstanding universal value, to solve issues and prevent conflicts, to coordinate and unite stakeholders. And that second last point is often neglected in the preparation of plans. They're often prepared in isolation from stakeholders. And then, of course, to prioritise the resource allocation. So a plan is a very helpful and cohesive way of bringing together the plan for what we need to do in relation to the property. So what should a plan do? Well, bear in mind that the plan is not done to comply with some bureaucratic process of the World Heritage Committee. It's done as a tool and a resource for the property. So the two things it provides are valuable information and guidance. And that information and that guidance can be provided to the managers of the site or the regulators. It can be relevant to the inhabitants or the users, to visitors or potential developments. And essentially what a plan is for is to be the basis for successful site management. And to do so, it needs to be realistic. It needs to set out actions which are suitable for the cultural, social, natural and political environment of the property. So that brings up the question of what a plan should contain. And I come back to that point about information and guidance. So initially, of course, the site needs to be introduced. Someone who is making reference to a management plan will expect to see the basic information, a description of the property, maps that define the property, an understanding of its history, its state of conservation, its existing management. Very fundamental is an understanding of significance. And of course, the place to find that for a World Heritage property is to commence with the statement of outstanding universal value. It's critical to have an analysis of the current situation. There is no point in diving straight into actions or policies without analysing what are the key issues, what are the threats to the property, what are the opportunities that arise in relation to the property. And then finally, there needs to be some kind of forward pathway, and that's usually expressed with three elements. Firstly, some objectives or some guiding principles, some big picture strategies for the property. Secondly, policies. Policies are terribly important because they allow people to make decisions along the way. So if there is a policy about building conservation or a policy about landscape or a policy about tourism, when particular matters arise during the management of the property, the policies can provide really helpful and valuable guidance. And then it's very typical to have a third element as part of the future path, and that is some kind of action plan. Things to be done, tasks to be implemented, allocation of responsibilities for those who will take those actions. I mentioned earlier the question of stakeholders, and probably if I wanted to emphasise one slide in this entire presentation, it would be this slide, to say that it is really important to involve people with an interest of the site. Now, obviously, that is decision makers and regulators. It might be managers, it might be others responsible for implementation. There may well be specialist advisors, consultants or facilitators. But the paragraph at the bottom, I would draw to your attention that conservation, interpretation and management places should provide for the participation of people for whom the place has significant associations and meanings, or who have social, spiritual or other cultural responsibilities for the place. So it's really important as part of a management plan process to bring these stakeholders who are invested in the place through their social connections on the management plan journey. So what that means is that a plan isn't ultimately adopted by a single authority or author. It actually needs to embrace and reflect a collective vision. And I won't read them out, but it may include a whole range of stakeholders, from technical people to managers to those with interest in development or interest in tourism, right through to religious groups or teachers or tour operators. Earlier in this presentation, I had on the left-hand side of the slide this core process of assessing values, identifying issues, developing policies and managing. And it's true to say that most tuition in preparation of management plans for cultural and natural heritage places has tended to adopt a linear process, a bit like the diagram on the left, to say do one step after another. Well, the comment I would make is that that's not how it happens. In fact, the process for preparing management plans is much more like the diagram on the right, where the steps are interrelated. And sometimes it's necessary to identify issues and understand problems before assessing full values. Sometimes local values will only become apparent once there is a suggestion about a policy with which stakeholders are unhappy. And so the process for preparing plans should not be linear. It needs to be iterative, and it needs to allow for circling back and revisiting so that those who are participating in the process ultimately agree with, are comfortable with, and will support the outcome. We're often asked about the time needed to prepare a management plan, and the comment that I would make here is that it's very important to proceed with thoroughness and confidence, and depending on the nature of the property, it's very typical for preparation of a plan to take between 6 months right up to several years. Depending again on the property, there may be conflicts between stakeholders. World Heritage properties tend to have a major local impact. They tend to have economic consequences which need to be addressed, and they tend to give rise to diverse opinions. So it's very important to take the time for interaction which allows those issues to be properly considered, addressed and resolved. And then a management plan is not a document that then sits on a shelf or even in an office or out on site and never changes. Management plans need to be regularly reviewed, and they particularly need to be reviewed where circumstances change. And circumstances can be the circumstance of the site, so it can be some physical change, a natural disaster or something like that, or it can be a political change where the government of the day changes the regulatory rules relating to the site, or it could be a market change such as increasing tourism. And the point is, when major drivers for policy positions in plans change, it's terribly important that the plans are consequentially updated. And the last point on this slide is really quite important, that a management plan is never perfect. So, you know, there are some very disturbing cases that come to the committee where plans have taken literally decades to be prepared because state party authorities and agencies are reluctant to formally adopt them until everything is resolved. Well, it's actually better to get the plan in place, to have it implemented, to have it adopted and use it, and then amend it progressively, because it will never be perfect. And then finally, and we could spend an entire training session on this issue, it's really important that the plan be effectively implemented. It needs to be endorsed. It needs to be accepted by both the relevant national authority and the World Heritage Committee. Importantly, it needs to be disseminated. It needs to be actively used by those who are making decisions, by those who are managing the site. It needs to be available to the stakeholders. There needs to be an implementation plan which will allocate the resources that are needed, will determine priorities, because very few World Heritage properties are blessed with enough resources. And then it's really important that there be regular monitoring, updates of the site and progress. That of course feeds into periodic reporting. It feeds into the state of conservation reporting to the committee. And ultimately, in the light of those, that monitoring, the plan needs to be evaluated, and where appropriate, it needs to be revised. And my final slide in this initial part of the management plans presentation is to say that there is a volume published by our friends at IUCN called Enhancing Our Heritage. It's the evaluation toolkit. And even though I'm presenting on behalf of ICOMOS, can I say that in my experience, this is the best available mechanism in the World Heritage space for assessing and evaluating management effectiveness, and particularly the effectiveness of management plans, and I look forward to the day when, through further collaboration of the kind we're currently seeing in impact assessment, we might have a cohesive natural and cultural management effectiveness toolkit. Now, at this point, I thank you for your attention to date, and I think I will now be handing to my colleague Mizuki Murai from IUCN. I just need to escape from sharing the screen and give the floor back to Mizuki.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I'll be presenting just a few slides on integrated management. Let me try to find a way to do that. Okay, oddly, I'm not able to share my slides.
Let me take a look. You should have the functionality to do so. Let's see.
I could try it through a different way, which is through the browsing option.
Yes, for PowerPoints that actually might work quite smoothly. So.
Okay.
Excellent. We can see your presentation.
Okay, excellent. So just to briefly say, I'm Mizuki Murai from the IUCN World Heritage Programme. I'm the Conservation Officer in charge of Asia region as one of my responsibilities. I would just like to go through some of the key points relating to integrating management. There are a number of guidance documents relating to management of World Heritage Sites as well as protected areas more generally. And here are just some main guiding points that I've picked out. Firstly, management plans have to be prepared and implemented within the context of lands, issues and peoples surrounding the World Heritage Site. Regional integration becomes particularly important when others are responsible for administering areas beyond site boundaries. For example, it would be of limited value to have a sound management plan that stopped at the boundary of the World Heritage Site if the surrounding regional development strategies pursued contrary objectives. There are many national, regional and local plans and strategies which could affect a World Heritage Site, so it's important to understand the relationship between them. National legislation and policies are a fundamental influence that should also be understood and taken into account. So before starting the preparation of a management plan for a World Heritage Site, it's necessary to identify how the different demands and impacts of other development plans, policies and land uses may affect the site. Secondly, it's important that the core objectives of World Heritage Management Plans are recognised consistently and fully reflected in other regional and local plans. The World Heritage Management Plan in some cases may identify the need for changes to be made in the policies of other plans that affect the World Heritage property. And thirdly, there are many cases where World Heritage Site fully or partially overlap with other internationally designated areas. This includes, for example, a World Heritage Site overlapping with a Ramsar site, or a UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve, or a UNESCO Geopark. In such a case, there's a need to harmonise the management, systematic conservation and sustainable use of these areas. A few years ago, IUCN produced this report on addressing this exact topic of managing multi-internationally designated areas. There are many benefits to having multi-internationally designated areas, including reasons such as multiple forms of international recognition having the potential to increase the resilience of natural areas to external pressures as they underline the diverse values of a site in the global arena. Also that it facilitates engagements and participation of local communities in conservation and management. It can also accentuate significance for research, education and public awareness. But there are also challenges associated with MIDAs. There might be different national authorities in charge of the different designations. There might be lack of coordination that may result in competition for securing national and international funding for site management. There might be lack of training for site managers in handling multiple international designations. And it might also be confusing for local communities and visitors if communication is not put forward clearly. So this report offers a number of recommendations to go about these challenges, and I've highlighted two main ones here, which I thought would be relevant to the audience here today. So firstly, what it means for the site level is that there's a need to revise and update the management plans. A new coherent and single management plan to accommodate all the objectives and requirements of the respective international designations would be needed. And at the national level, it becomes important to ensure effective coordination structure for enhanced site management, information sharing and reporting. By assigning focal point functions for Ramsar and UNESCO designated sites to a single national institution, we could prevent duplication of efforts and expenses and should be sought where possible. And now I will pass over to Eugene Zhou from ICROM. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mizuki, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Sorry to make you go through this again, but I'll have to go through another round of sharing slides. So let me just make sure that I can do that. Can I confirm that you can actually see my full screen?
Yes, go ahead, go one slide. Great, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to chime in. I only have a couple of slides that I would like to share, but I just wanted to chime in with a couple of messages that was highlighted by Richard and Mizuki prior to my presentation. And the fact is that just wanted to make sure that when we address management systems and management plans, we just need to highlight the fact that most of the reasons why such World Heritage properties, many World Heritage properties are going through state of conservation reports, going through reactive monitoring, or going through danger listing is actually stemming from the fact that most of the issues originate from outside of the property itself. And there are many different factors that affect the property negatively coming from outside, which is in many cases outside the jurisdiction or the responsibility of the site manager itself. So I think the core issue, the key issue to remember in establishing management plans or addressing management systems is the fact that we need to ground ourselves on OUV and understanding the heritage place itself and its relationships and the dynamics that the heritage it has with the surrounding environment as it is, and no longer isolate heritage and place heritage in a vacuum itself. So whereas in the past we've concentrated really on the middle part of doing good management itself, and I just wanted to highlight a little sort of picture here, a diagram where we think that once you have a good foundation of a management, it then leads on to the site being very well prepared for any potential disasters. But also it actually gives a very good foundation for doing very substantial impact assessments coming in at very appropriate timings with substantive material to be able to judge whether or not this implied change is going to be negative or positive, because you have the good basis of management already established at the site. And that way we'll all be able to go head towards and be directed towards the objective of creating a healthy heritage place, but also a heritage that is contributing to society. But we just need to remember that this good management isn't an isolated process, and it really needs to be grounded on understanding the heritage place itself, the heritage itself and its relationship with the surrounding place and the environment, and the aspects of the values and attributes needs to be embedded in understanding the context, the factors surrounding the property, and also the people who are part of that heritage, but also part of the society that supports that heritage. So in trying to make sure that these elements are understood, and also understanding the fact that there are so many management plans and there are so many different processes that site managers now need to be aware of, what we're trying to do in the new revision of the management manuals is that we understand that many of the elements that constitute a management plan or a management system are they can be shared throughout many different plans and many different approaches and processes. So we're trying to drill down the most common elements that need to be identified in a management system. And this is a slide that sort of shows the essential elements that needs to be included in a management plan. And and please don't put any priority in terms of order. This is still material in development, but the heritage place needs to be grounded on the values and attributes of the heritage itself, but then also on the people and communities, on the services and benefits that it provides, on the factors affecting the place, the social, economic, and environmental context, and that subsequently leading to understanding what kind of boundaries and wider setting that the heritage is situated in. And of course, the management plans also need to address issues of governance, understanding what kind of legal and customary frameworks that this work is based on, identifying out of the different people and communities that are occupying the site or living around the site, to identify who are the stakeholders and the right holders, and also understanding the institutions and organizations, the institutional frameworks. And then comes in the aspect of management, where we have long-term strategic directions with different plans all chiming in together. And I just wanted to highlight here, it's not just the plan itself that is the important part, but as Richard has highlighted numerous times in this presentation, it's the planning process that is very, very important in this case. And the needs, understanding what we need to do and what we have, the inputs that we have, that we can put into implementing the management plan. And then, of course, implementing it, monitoring and evaluating it so that we can improve it for the future rounds and cycles. And we hope that all of these management plans and systems are ultimately serving the purpose of us being able to conserve and manage the heritage site itself, the World Heritage Property and the wider heritage area itself, but also being able to achieve and meet the sustainable development goals of that particular area. And in a way, continuously feeding into the next management planning cycle to be able to improve the management system that we operate in. I just want to close by highlighting the resources and just to come back to what Richard was mentioning about the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit, because I'm actually very happy to say that we are working on adapting it for cultural sites as well, together with this is an IUCN-driven project, but we're all collaborating together, the advisory bodies and the World Heritage Centre, to be able to update the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit so that you have a toolkit that would speak to the management manual. And if you're curious about whether or not your management system is actually working well, what are we missing, what are the gaps, you can actually pick up this toolkit in the future and be able to apply it, go through it with the site management team and understand where the gaps are in terms of your current management system and plans. So I just wanted to highlight that this is work and development, and hopefully by mid this year, towards the second half of this year, we'll be able to produce an updated EOH toolkit that could be provided for the use of the wider public. And with this, I just want to close because I just wanted to also highlight that the slide that I showed previously, all these different elements constituting the management elements, the units, they will all be appearing simultaneously and in parallel to all the different materials that are currently under revision within the World Heritage Leadership Programme. So the Management Manual for World Heritage, both culture and nature, Managing Disaster Risk Manual, the Enhancing Our Heritage Toolkit, the Impact Assessment Guidance, that would apply to both culture and nature, where we're trying to merge the existing IUCN and e-commerce guidances. These are all sort of going to ground itself on understanding how these elements work together. So I just wanted to emphasize that whatever different processes that we approach, it's really important to understand that management is at the core basis. The plan and the elements that are identified within the management plan is absolutely crucial in moving any other approaches forward. Thank you. So with that, I would just like to finish my contribution to the management system part. And Michelle, please, or Anatole, guide us through. Shall we just move straight on to impact assessments, or would you like to moderate another discussion session here?
Nope, please do feel free to move on straight to impact assessment. I think perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Then for the elements on impact assessment, I'll be going first, and after me, Richard and Mizuki are also going to be joining me in delivering this part of the presentation. Can you see my screen? Is this okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So we've been talking about impact assessment, and it's basically a tool. It's a process that you can adopt in order to be prepared to say what kind of changes is going to be beneficial for the site or harmful for the site, really. And the material that we're going to be presenting here is a collaborative effort between ECROM, ECOMOS, IUCN, and the UNESCO World Heritage Center, and primarily Richard McKay and Mizuki Murai, who are going to present together with me, are the key focal points of each of the institutions working together with me on this development of the guidance. And we've also had a lot of collaboration from other different consultants and specialists, who I won't be able to mention here, but just to highlight that the result of a collaborative work ongoing. And I think impact assessments have been in the highlight of the World Heritage Convention for a very long time now. And increasingly, as we go by, the request for different heritage impact assessments, environmental impact assessments, and strategic environmental assessments are increasing every year. And at the moment, it's quite hard for us within the heritage sector to see what is good and how can we actually apply this to heritage sites. I just wanted to go over the basic terminology first before we dive into any of the details. And it's to differentiate between SEAs, EIAs, and HIAs. And broadly speaking, there are two types of assessments. One is the strategic environmental assessment, which is conducted at the level of policies, plans, and programs. So it happens at a much earlier stage of establishing a sort of a regional development policy or a sort of a national traffic plan, like a freeway, establishing an entire freeway that goes across the nation, so on and so forth. So it happens at a much earlier stage and at a broader level. And increasingly, we're finding that it's much more useful and it's much more effective for heritage sites to be at the site of doing the strategic environmental assessments. Whereas the environmental impact assessments, EIAs, are it's the process that's activated at a project level. So if there is a specific project like building a shopping mall in a specific place, or if there is the need for building a railway station, or if there is the need for drilling a hole, a place in order to drill to install a specific pipeline in a specific place. It's at the project level when environmental impact assessments are activated to understand the project itself and the impact that it will have on the vicinity of that project, but in particular for World Heritage, how it would impact the outstanding universal value of the heritage property. Now, as opposed to the EIA being quite well established and having legal legislation activated in almost all the states parties of the World Heritage Convention, there is another process that has been established within the World Heritage community called Heritage Impact Assessment. Because although EIAs by nature are supposed to be including cultural elements and also heritage into their scope of assessments, it's very often that EIA practitioners don't necessarily have the speciality to be able to address the heritage needs. So ICOMOS has produced guidance that would actually guide people through into conducting an impact assessment that is specifically focusing on what kind of impacts that the proposed development would have on the heritage itself. And that we call the Heritage Impact Assessment. So it's at the similar level of the EIAs, where it's activated at a project level. But World Heritage can be included as a component within environmental impact assessments, within heritage impact assessment, but also in strategic environmental assessments. Now, this is more or less the overall process that we're working towards in the revised guidance that we're going to put out. We're going to be producing during the course of this year. And in a nutshell, it looks like this, but I won't go into details now because Richard and Mizuki are actually going to go through each of the steps a little bit more in detail. But these steps, the process suggested here, can be applicable to both cases of a World Heritage being included in a broader environmental assessment, impact assessment, but also it can be activated when you're doing a specific impact assessment just focusing on the World Heritage itself. And I just wanted to highlight in the slide that it's not a single entity that will take up the responsibility of executing each step. There are multiple entities that will be responsible for different steps of the processes, and I presume that most of the audience here are either from national, regional, or municipal governments, and your role will mostly be likely concentrated at the beginning and also towards the end, where you make specific decisions in relation to the findings of the impact assessment itself, and what you commission out at the beginning and how you receive the results and make management decisions based on the impact assessment would very much dictate the quality of the impact assessment, how it is executed and how it would be followed up in subsequence. I just wanted to go over a few of the principles that you need to keep in mind in conducting impact assessments. And just to understand that impact assessment itself is really a tool. It's a procedural tool that can make you move towards, make you go forward and help you achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which is compatible with the protection and conservation of World Heritage. So it's to be able to achieve the goals set out for protecting the environment, for achieving the societal goals, but also rendering economic benefits, but at the same time being able to stick to the heritage agenda of protecting the OUV of the World Heritage property. And again and again, I can't emphasize this more than it is written. Any decisions about any kind of proposals that could potentially affect World Heritage properties should ensure the protection and conservation of the attributes which contribute to their OUV and other values. So the impact assessment process itself has to be based on identifying the OUV and the attributes. It has to be based on protecting the attributes that represent the OUV. And this, I'm sure that Richard and Mizuki will highlight a little bit more during the process itself. And as I mentioned in my previous presentation about management systems and plans, impact assessment is another way of practicing management. And the information that you use to do impact assessments can also be used for management planning, for monitoring, for interpretation, for management, for disaster risk management, so on and so forth. So it's the use of already existing information to be fitted into a different process. And it really needs to be embedded within the management system of the World Heritage Property. I'd like to highlight that an impact assessment should not consider a single project in isolation or just a single type of impact, but it needs to really evaluate whether the project is part of a broader trend or if there are any cumulative impacts that needs to be taken into consideration. So for instance, you're seeing here a proposal in the photograph, a proposal for development of a seaport in Sri Lanka at the World Heritage Property of Galle. And it can't just be about establishing a single installment on this particular location, but you also have to think about the cumulative impacts of what it would bring in terms of the different ships coming in terms of the environmental impacts that it would have on the sea barrier, on the coastal areas that are immediately in the vicinity of this new installment. I also take the case of Venice for illustrating this particular point of cumulative impacts. When Venice opened up to receive large-scale cruise ships, the impact of tourism was aggravated, and this is actually a cumulative impact and an indirect impact from increasing the seaport facilities and receiving large-scale cruise ships into the port of Venice. And these cumulative impacts need to be foreseen when doing an impact assessment so that you can be prepared for the kind of changes that would be coming into the property itself after such development has taken place. And impact assessments, just like management planning, needs to be carried out as an iterative process. It's not a linear one. The different processes that we've outlined in colorful little boxes with numbers is not to imply that as you go through it and you go through it once, it's done. It's just to clarify the different steps and processes involved, but it's actually a repeated and an iterative one. And again, I take the example of Galle here, where we say this was the original proposal of developing a seaport to receive cruise ships. Now, when this was considered to be inappropriate and negatively impacting the World Heritage Property of Galle, another proposal came out which addressed most of the key challenges that was identified in the first round of identification of impacts and evaluating the impacts themselves. And when this new proposal came in, it was necessary that another iterative process of identifying the potential impacts of this new proposal needed to be conducted so that we could understand whether or not this was an appropriate revision and a redesigning of the project itself. So just consider the impact assessment process as more of a designing tool where you can understand what the heritage place is and what the project proposal is, so that you can, as long as you're there, inserted into the process early enough, you can actually contribute in designing the proposal much more effectively and much more compatibly to be able to have benefits and positive impacts on the heritage itself, rather than having a negative impact and always saying no to different proposals. Now, I just wanted to highlight the fact that impact assessment processes are also very useful for strengthening heritage resilience in response to disasters and climate change. And here I just highlight an example that was produced by Peter Shady from IUCN. This is a photograph taken in 2006 following the 2004 tsunami, where a wave height of about 7 meters hit a property, a hotel, a resort property on Yala Safari on the northwest Sri Lankan coast. And the resort, when it was being developed and established in this particular place, they cleared out most of the sand dunes and the natural vegetation in front in order to provide a sea view for the hotel customers. Now, when the tsunami hit, it completely demolished the entire establishment, and the hotel lost property damage that equivalent to about 1.4 million US dollars. The hotel was closed for more than 2 years. Staff was cut down by 60%, and a reduction of turnover was more than 50%. And the estimated loss to the local economy because of the goods and services that the hotel was purchasing in the local community was about 800,000 US dollars per year. Now, in contrary to that, this is the same coastline, just a little bit up north. And this was again a photograph taken during the same time period. And there was an eco resort that did not clear the coast for an ocean view, but instead integrated the resort within the natural surroundings. And you can see it here in the circled green roof here. And for this hotel, the same tsunami only affected the property with the height of about 5 centimeters compared to the 7 meters tsunami wave of the resort before. So you can see that when they were conducting an impact assessment, they also took into account the hazards and the risks for increased disasters and vulnerability to disaster risks to be able to be incorporated into the impact assessment to make a very sound management decision to say how a development proposal should take place, so on and so forth. I just wanted to highlight as kind of the last principle to say that an impact assessment needs to consider a range of relevant project options and alternatives, but it really needs to highlight the fact that if it's detrimental to the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage property, it needs to have the option to say not to proceed with the project. And in the case of Villa Adriana in Italy, it was an impact assessment was conducted, and it produced the result that any kind of development, whether it is mitigating any of the negative impacts or not, or reduced or revised, it would not be compatible with the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage. And in the end, the project was cancelled thanks to the decision of the culture minister of Italy. So just to highlight the fact that although I presented the possibility of using the impact assessment process to be a designing process as well, it does also have to highlight the fact that if it's not compatible with the World Heritage, it needs to have the possibility to say no-go to a project. Now, just to highlight the first 3 steps, which is participation. Again, as is management planning, the participation element goes throughout the entire process, where all different types of stakeholders and rights holders, specialists, especially depending on the type of the project, different people need to be involved. And the process of their involvement needs to be independent, it needs to be inclusive and transparent so that an accountable decision-making process can be adopted. So in the case of Sri Lanka, when they were trying to develop a seaport, a marine engineer, a technical engineer was included into the impact assessment. Sometimes lawyers need to be included into the impact assessment to seek out different administrative procedures. So be conscious of the fact that you need to involve a wide range of different specialists for different types of proposals. And also, it's very important to involve environmental organizations for climate change issues and DRM organizations so that you have a good account of different hazards that underlie in the area. The first step to be activated for impact assessment, it's to understand whether or not an assessment needs to take place. Now, an impact assessment needs to be carried out at the earliest of stages possible for any potential proposal, so that it can influence a lot of the designing and the construction, commissioning, and the aftermath effects of any given project. So be aware that you need to be there at the very, very beginning. It's not supposed to be here, but it really needs to be moved forward. And when you're actually trying to understand whether or not an impact assessment needs to take place, the relative location is a factor, but it's not the only factor. If it happens within a World Heritage property or within the buffer zone, obviously, yes, it needs to happen. any kind of proposal needs to go through an impact assessment process. But at the same time, even if it's outside of the property area or the buffer zone, if it's going to have an impact on the outstanding universal value, then you need to go through an impact assessment process. And this is in the case of Gaul, where obviously the seaport development was being proposed for outside of the buffer zone, but it was going to have a significant impact on the OUV of the property. This is also the case for different properties. And for the scale of the project itself as well, sometimes the development project is originating from not even within your own country, but from 2 countries away, which is in this particular case of the Lapsat project, where a project that was initiated in South Sudan coming through Ethiopia is ultimately also affecting the World Heritage Property of Lamu town in Kenya. So you need to understand the scale of the project itself and how it would impact the OUV of different properties in the vicinity of those projects. And once you have decided, yes, you need to go through an impact assessment, you need to then go through a scoping process, which is to define what elements that this particular impact assessment needs to look at. And this can be sort of equated to writing out a terms of reference, let's say. It needs to initially understand the OUV of the property, but also underlying other values, and trying to understand the basic elements of the proposal being put on the table, so that you can understand what the scope of the entire impact assessment report is going to be. Just to highlight once more that hazards need to be taken into account when you're doing an impact assessment. There are many different existing hazard and risk maps that are accumulated by different entities within your national authorities, and we would strongly advise that these maps be incorporated into conducting the impact assessment, so that climate change induced hazards and disaster induced hazards are not increasing any of the vulnerability or cumulative impacts of the proposed development that is being put forward. And I just wanted to close my presentation here and hand over to Richard, who would take us through the rest of the process and give you information. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Just if I may just step in for a quick second, if I can ask Richard and Mizuki to, in view of the time, perhaps speed along through the examples just a little bit, because we do have then 2 presentations by the Category 2 centers, and we did promise to release everyone by 11, which is looking increasingly unlikely. But if we can all make an effort to try and keep time, then we can limit the impact of our lateness on everyone. Thank you very much.
Anatole, could I just check that my second presentation is visible on screen, please?
Yes, all good, Richard.
Well, I'll move as quickly as I can.
If you want full screen, you may have to switch to the other style of presenting again. Apologies.
Sorry. Okay. So is the full screen visible now?
It doesn't seem to be. If we're short on time, I
will just keep going rather than waste the time of participants. I'll simply say, with respect to this image, that the point of undertaking impact assessment is to make good decisions. And while renewable energy is a great thing, perhaps in this case there was not an understanding of the impact on the visual setting of this historic town. I'm going to follow the steps that Eugene has laid out, and I'll simply highlight rather than reading the slides. But when it comes to understanding the significance, the baseline assessment of a property, a good place to start is always the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value on the World Heritage Centre website. And I highlight here with the small green arrows that making reference to the criteria, making reference to statements of integrity and authenticity provides a good basis for understanding what are the values of the property that might be affected and which need to be considered. The aforementioned ICOMOS guidance 2011, readily available on the ICOMOS website or the World Heritage Centre website, also provide really good guidance about breaking down OUV into specific attributes, in this case relating to perhaps archaeology or built heritage or historic landscape or intangible values. And in order to assess the impact of proposals, it's terribly important to understand the fine grain of the OUV, those attributes that make a contribution. The example that I've included is one from Australia, and I will come back to this later. I won't take a lot of time now to say to give you a full history of the site, but it was a penal settlement from the 19th century, and there was a proposal for a history and interpretation centre built on top of what is essentially today an archaeological site. And so the way in which this baseline assessment was undertaken was to look at the different attributes as expressed in listing citations. And so the reason to put the chart on the screen in front of you is as an example of the format. And this one deals with the research values of this property, and it actually provides quotes from the individual statutory listing citations, and it analyses in the red text what could be the possible impact of the project. This is not a conclusion, it's just relating the potential impacts of the project to the actual values as expressed in the statutory management documents. And so it's very necessary then, as part of this process, to understand exactly what is proposed and how it will affect not only the fabric of the site, but the setting of the site and the other attributes that contribute to the outstanding universal value of the site. The example I'm using here relates to a proposal that is current in the Historic Centre of Vienna in Austria. And the building that is arrowed in the image on screen was part of a process that has led to the inscription of this property on the list of World Heritage in Danger. And that well-informed decision was possible because of the understanding of the nature of what was proposed. So there were drawings and plans and reports and photographs that enable decision makers to understand the implications of the proposal. And so the impacts were identified, and in these three images, the top left is a very important historic image of the Historic Centre of Vienna from the Belvedere Gardens. The top right-hand image is the current view of the same perspective, and then the bottom right-hand image shows how that would change if the building were to be built. So there was a clear linkage between the information about the proposal and the understanding of the values of the place, so that the impact could be understood. Now, in terms of grading the impacts, again, the ICOMOS guidance is quite helpful, and it provides some colour-coded charts. And as Eugene has mentioned, there's a collaboration happening for a new guidance at the moment that will improve these charts, but it can be a very effective tool for decision makers to rank the level of the impact from neutral to very great, and particularly to rank the scale and severity, so that it's possible for decision makers to see where things are going well or going badly. And I also use the example of the proposed port at Gaul, and on screen there are actual screen grabs from the Heritage Impact Statement that led to the decision to modify that port proposal. And you can simply see in the top right-hand box, in relation to OUV, Outstanding Universal Value, that the proposed port in its initial form had some very large, bright red negative impacts. And there are charts with words that explain what those impacts are. And the result of that assessment was that the design of the proposal was changed so that these impacts were reduced to what was regarded as an acceptable level. So here, this is an extract from, again, the HIS, the Heritage Impact Statement for the Old Town of Gaul Fort and port proposal. And I won't read the detail. I'll simply say that the left-hand column outlines the attributes of the property as derived from the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value. The middle large column outlines what was the nature of the negative impact. And then the right-hand columns, which are colour-coded, explain how the proposal would have impacted on OUV and other values. And so this is a really helpful technique for bringing together a large amount of complex information and putting it in an intelligible form before the decision makers. So once that has been done, then obviously the question of mitigation or enhancement arises. And I would simply say here, it's best to avoid negative impacts. If they can't be avoided, then it's best to minimise them. And sometimes there are opportunities to enhance and provide positive benefits. An important point though, the diagram on screen, which comes from the International Association for Impact Assessment, obviously starts at the bottom with avoiding, and that is highly preferable, but it moves right through to the concept of offsets. And a very important point for the advisory bodies to make today is that you cannot offset adverse impacts on outstanding universal value, because of World Heritage of itself is not something that can be offset by buying carbon credits or biodiversity credits. So when we're talking about a mitigation hierarchy for World Heritage, it's best to avoid, otherwise minimise, otherwise rectify. But beyond that, it's almost never possible. So it's important to understand what can or can't be done in relation to a World Heritage property and mitigating impact. As Eugene has already explained using the same slide, if there are mitigation and enhancement measures taken, then there is a need to reassess the proposed action and to re-evaluate the potential impacts and their severity. And I put in an example here. This one is the convict site, the prison site that I introduced earlier, where one of the primary significant research values related to archaeological features. And in an early iteration of the design, these would have been impacted by building footings. The Heritage Impact Assessment that was undertaken identified this as a major significant impact, affecting a highly valuable historic fabric with research potential from a World Heritage property. And therefore the design of the new interpretation centre was modified, as shown in the little sketch at the top of the screen, in order to lift the building and to put down preformed concrete pads with a supportive base so that the archaeological resources were retained intact. And the result of that is that what was an unacceptable impact became a neutral impact. Eugene has already mentioned Villa Adriana, and I won't take a lot of time now. I'll simply say that as a result of the impact assessment here, which related to a development proposed completely separately from the World Heritage property, in the top right-hand corner, using the ECOMOS methodology, it was identified that the project would have a large negative impact. Then what happens when this information is available? Well, as a state party, there is an obligation to report the impact to the committee. And so something that's quite important to understand is that with a World Heritage property where there is a significant impact on OUV, actually there are two decisions to be made. There's a decision to be made by the national decision maker, but importantly, there is also a decision to be made by the World Heritage Committee, which might provide highly relevant requests about the development proposal that inform the decision that is made by the national authority or decision maker. Then when you come to the decision making, and again using the example of Villa Adriana, so this was a development in the vicinity of a highly scenic World Heritage property where the HIA concluded that there was a major impact. It was concluded, and I will quickly read this top paragraph, that the development project would have a large negative impact on the heritage attributes with the property and on its relationship with the landscape which surrounds it and the buffer zone which convey the OUV. So the HIA concluded that this may result in listing of the property on the list of World Heritage in danger, and that the only option was to halt the development project. And that is in fact what happened as a result of a well-prepared, thorough, genuine heritage impact assessment. As Eugene has already showed you, that the relevant minister decided that even the mere suggestion of this property being placed on the list of World Heritage in danger or being removed from the list is totally unacceptable. And I conclude by saying that in undertaking this process, there are often quite difficult challenges to be faced. In view of the time, I won't take you through this slide, except to say that issues of independence are terribly important. Issues of including communities as well as experts are important. And with World Heritage, it is not a question of balancing positive and negative effects, because ultimately the objective is retention of outstanding universal value. And in view of the time at that point, I might finish and pass to Mizuki.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to be very quick through my presentations, and I'll probably just do selective slides. It's loading right now. So I'll just start. Oh, sorry, it's still not loading. So I'll just start off by saying that impact assessments are absolutely critical. But it's worth mentioning here that there are certain activities which the World Heritage Committee has considered to be strictly off limits inside a World Heritage site. So, for example, the committee has taken a position that mineral, oil and gas exploration and exploitation inside natural World Heritage sites are incompatible with the World Heritage status, and also that dams with large reservoirs should not be permitted inside natural World Heritage sites. So these are useful to take note of, as much time and resources can be saved if permitted and non-permitted activities could be differentiated at the outset of any proposals. I'm going to dive in at the step 4, because my colleagues have already covered steps 1 to 3. On this slide, I just wanted to mention that there are important considerations for the baseline assessment in ensuring that there is an interdisciplinary team of experts. And this paper here, which Eugene actually raised for me, was that in this paper, it makes reference to an EIE survey for a housing project in Panama's suburban forests, which reported only 12 common bird species in the project area. But when a bird expert subsequently conducted a survey in the same area, the expert, in just 2 hours, identified 121 bird species, including several rare and threatened species. So this just goes to show that it's vital to ensure that you have the right team of expertise conducting the different parts of the impact assessment. And just to flick through in view of time, I was intending to present a case study for a port expansion in Denmark. And the key thing for me to mention here is that, well, the project is shown in that the tiny blue that you can see, with the hashed green being the World Heritage Site and the orange was the Natura 2000, so not a World Heritage Site, but outside. What I wanted to mention here, I think that the key thing is that the State Party of Denmark shared with us an initial planning document, which is the document that you see on the top. before undertaking the EIA, which meant that the World Heritage Centre and the IUCN as the advisory body were able to comment on what the EIA was going to cover. And subsequently, 18 months later, we received the EIA, the document that you see in the back there. I saw that in the chat there was a question about the obligation on the state party side of submitting an EIA, and I would just say that there is a paragraph 172 on the operational guidelines, which requests states parties to inform the World Heritage Centre and the advisory bodies as soon as possible, at the earliest stage before decisions are made on any activities that are being proposed to be undertaken. So EIA would constitute a part of that process. And just to flick through again, within this particular case study in this EIA, the state party went through the 8 principles, the key principles that are outlined in the IUCN World Heritage Advice Note on Environmental Assessment, which made it very clear for readers such as ourselves at the World Heritage Centre and the IUCN to understand how and why the state party has assessed each of the principles and met and addressed these points. The EIA also goes through assessing various abiotic and biotic factors concerning the environment and linked to the outstanding universal value. This graph here, for example, illustrates sediment concentration in around the World Heritage Site in different seasons, so summer and winter on the left-hand side before the development, and in the EIA produced some modelling, computer modelling on what the sediment concentration would look like during construction, and it also goes on to produce many more graphs and many other analyses on what it would look like post-construction. So these all helped in the decision-making process. It also mapped marine mammal distribution, for example. We weren't quite able to see Richard's presentation, but this is a different version of what he was illustrating, which is to illustrate the mitigation hierarchy in the decision-making process. And this particular image was taken from the IUCN website. For World Heritage sites and protected areas, this avoidance of any impact is the utmost priority. But specifically for World Heritage Site, as Richard mentioned, this offsetting is not compatible with the protection of OUV, because by its very nature and by its name, outstanding universal value, it's so unique that it's irreplaceable. And just lastly to mention that on the IUCN website, we have the IUCN, the advice note on environmental assessment that's available in multiple languages. As my colleagues mentioned, though, we are currently working on a revised version on impact assessments to cover nature and culture, which would become available in future. So over to you, Anatole.
Thank you very much. Let's just, because the time is running on, and I think it would still be interesting to hear the remaining 2 presentations. If some of you need to leave, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and we will answer them as soon as possible. And as always, all of the presentations and the recordings of the session will be made available to the national focal points and after the session, and they will be shared with everyone. And please do feel free to forward them as well. We will share all of the links as soon as possible after the session. Unless anyone has any objection, I think we can invite people Anatole? To leave. Yes, Michel.
Just quickly, it seems like Gautam will be leaving since he has another commitment. So we have one presentation, which would be WH-periodicreporting, and then otherwise I'll leave it to you.
Okay, very good. Well, then I'll hand over to Marie-Noëlle Tournou from WH-periodicreporting, and we can then have our Q&A session after her presentation. And I look forward to hearing a preview of the rather extensive study that wh-period has done on state of conservation reports that have been presented to the World Heritage Committee in the APA region over the last number of years, especially as regards questions of management. Yeah, over to you, Mahinoed. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so
and see you.
I have to share, where is it? Seems I'm stuck.
Are you able to open back to partage?
I'm trying to, and it's stuck.
If you'd like, I do have a copy of your presentation. I can present it.
Could you show the slides, because it's going to take forever to get this technical thing sorted, and I think we need to move on.
Give me a moment. I will. Let's see. We will share this and then this. This is your presentation, correct?
Yep.
All right, then I will see if I can do full screen. Sorry, I have to just move a few things around.
And then on my side.
Okay.
So if you could go to the next slide. So briefly, my name is Mahinoed Tournou. I'm project director at wh-period. It's in a category 2 center. And as you know, we focus on world heritage and training and research, and our objective is to support UNESCO's programs. We are the service of member states. I'll sort of pause that one quickly. If you could go to the next slide, please, Michel. So this study was undertaken at my initiative and with Peng Yang, intern at wh-period Shanghai. So why? It's to firstly see what's been happening between the second cycle and now, as a sort of preview of the results of this third cycle. As you know, we've got 269 properties, mostly cultural, less natural and mixed properties. Regarding reports, we had 317 concerning 95 properties. All this information comes from the website of the World Heritage Center. It looks at the threats and sub-threats, and it also, I would say, which is the purpose, is actually to compare with the final report on the results of the second cycle of the periodic reporting exercise for the Asia Pacific. Could you kindly move to the next one, please? Okay, this is just a recap. You know all this. There were already sessions on threats and conservation. So we've got 13 sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. 13 standard threats, which each have individual sub-threats. So I won't go into these in detail. Could you kindly shift to the next slide, please, Michel? Yeah, so these are the references to the report. You can find it online. The presentation will be shared, so you'll have the further information. Allow me to go through very quickly, thanks for shifting the slide, to the information in the final report. So it goes through cultural properties, natural and mixed sites. So there are several types of factors. So on the physical fabric per se of sites and mostly also of meaning built heritage. We have building and development, which is extremely relevant also to this session on heritage impact, because it focuses on project. And the other one, 8, is also extremely important because that's where you have tourism and the threats and impact, especially of ill-managed tourism and mass tourism. Another one we could link also to building and development is transportation and infrastructure and service infrastructure, because that is definitely part of those wider development initiatives and projects. And that's also where heritage impact assessments are absolutely crucial. Pollution is extremely true for natural sites, especially marine and coastal sites. Could you kindly shift to the next one? So these are our natural properties, which also have their specific elements. But again, we find 8 as an important one. Pollution also is important. We have things which are more specific to natural sites, such as invasive species. Climate change is there, definitely. It's actually not only for natural properties, but it's clearly there in the second cycle, and we'll see it's something which is definitely ongoing. And then we have also sub-region specific factors, and for mixed properties, again, these issues of transport and building, and also social and cultural heritage. Could you kindly, so I've already, could you shift to the next slide, please? I realize this is a very austere presentation. There's actually no pictures. Within this time bracket of 2010 and 2019, there were 6 properties on a site in danger. Most of them are still today, up to today, of course. And there was even, as you know, one site which there were discussion of the committee on taking up the list, so a very big issue. But within the process, there are several sites which were removed from the endangered list. Also, this analysis of the SOC report shows, I mean, as you know, and it's pretty obvious, that the SOC mechanism is long-term with sites which are examined by the committee and submitted to provide a SOC report for several years. It can be 4, 5, and even more. Again, as we know, the SOC reporting is always considered as something negative by state parties. But again, we should really emphasize that it's an opportunity to further discussion for working with the different partners to ensure achieving the DSOC, which is the removal of the site on the SOC process. Could you kindly shift to the next one? So again, this is also a recap. You know, there's within these 13 threats and factors, you have also these sub-factors, which are very, very detailed. Again, we can go quickly through that and shift to the next one and the next one. So this is more material, and this is where we see the frequency of what are the top issues between 2010 and 2019. I mean, this is spot on. We've been discussing HI, we've been discussing management plan, and category 13 is about management plan. So this really has become on top of the list. It's not to say that it wasn't an issue before, but it's definitely been put forward within the SOC report. So we could say it's something which is really more and more within the limelight of the whole process. If you could go to the next slide. So again, I probably can't read this, but this is more into the details of the SOC analysis and with the SOC threat. The next one is easier to read. If we go to some key findings. So again, We definitely have management, so that's threat 13, and the top one is management systems and management plans. So this is absolutely important to address. Governance is also important. The figures on the right, the numbers on the right, are the number of SOCs which refer to that. Of course, many sites have several factors and threats. So within a same site and for a same SOC, you obviously have 2, 3, or 4 threats. They are, the order is numbers, but also, again, you can see this logic of putting together some threats. Again, the management, the building, the transportation are things that go together, and again, that's where the management and the impact assessment. Again, our friends from the ABs have all repeated on the importance of having this holistic approach, this territorial approach, this larger setting approach, and also intersectorial approach. Mining is not so important in terms of numbers, but it's definitely super important in terms of impact and the importance it has on these sites. So again, these are the main issues we see. If you could go to the next slide. So this is something we've also been looking at, and we will go more into the details, which is actually looking at sites also per themes. Some of these themes are on the World Heritage database, if you make a search on the SOC database. But we also added monuments and archaeology, because again, this is a way of looking at scale. If you have sites, the value is more on monument or archaeology. It's totally different scale from cities or marine and coastal, and the type of factors will be different. So this is something we'll be looking more into. If you could kindly go to the next slide. So again, to summarize the key findings, definitely the management issues. Out of the 5 sites, the 6 sites on the list in danger are threatened by poor management issues. Again, development, and I mean today urban development is a major issue worldwide, be it for World Heritage Site, but not only. We know that more than half of the population in the world lives in an urban environment. Tourism also linked to the increase of visitors, and also this is a side effect of an inscription. This is something also we know. Our colleagues at the World Heritage Center who work on the tourism program have also worked on these issues and also providing guidance. We have demolition and rebuilding of traditional housing, also linked to bad management, especially town planning or territorial planning. Also loss of know-how. In certain areas we have civil unrest and war. Of course, we think of Banyan cultural landscape and the impact of the war. Also, something we can further focus on is the issue of rural areas and agricultural land. It's not necessarily detailed in detail in the SOC, but it's definitely something which is important, which is linked to actually the social aspect. And one of the main issues is how to maintain this eventually traditional agricultural know-how, meaning the farmers, meaning sustainability and livability. So again, we see the issue of encroachment. It can go 2 ways: encroachment of forests by agricultural land. In other regions, we also know that there's encroachment of agricultural in natural reserve or natural environment. But again, I think we need to stress that most threats are really connected to large territorial issues. And if we compare, so that would be the next slide, if we make a quick comparison between the report of the second cycle and these findings of the looking into the 2010-2019 SOC reports. So again, building and development, transport and infrastructure, social and cultural uses are key factors. And this again, we stress it, is linked to management issues. More for natural side, biological resources use, climate change again, and I guess we will see more on that. Of course, what comes out of the report is also linked at the way we look at the threats, and definitely climate change now, not just now, but it's definitely an issue that is a key priority. So there's more and more studies and attention to this issue, and also because it's happening, definitely. Mining has been also more frequently addressed, as our colleagues just mentioned. So this is really a super quick overview. The report study is not exactly finished yet, so we're going to look further into the interconnection between factors and threats to see if there are more threat trends. This can probably lead to looking at areas where gaps can be filled, especially in terms of management mechanisms, and in particular, again, in terms of impacts assessment. So that's it. There are a few typos, sorry. Information on impact assessment. You may know that wh has been involved in training and organizing training with ECOM on impact assessment. We were supposed to have one in 2021, but the sanitary situation prevented that. So it is still planned, but in 2022, it's planned in Japan, and it's a colleague Li Hong and also a former colleague from ECOM, Gamini Wijeshuriya, who is in charge of organizing that. I'll quickly put in the chat the contact details of my colleagues, so you can have a look at the wh website and have the contact details of my colleague. So this was a super quick overview, but I think at this point time is running short, so it's really just an introduction. Colleagues from the centre, which I thank again for allowing me to contribute, have also asked me to contribute on the 25th of March on the historic urban recommendation, meaning the urban heritage issues. So again, looking at the SOC and the result of the SOCs, but also linking with management and impact assessments will be part of the presentation. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you again, colleagues, for inviting me to present this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marie-Noëlle. I think that's also a very good way of showing that none of the things that we talk about in our little subdivided sessions exist separately from one another, but that everything, it is a system. So the state of conservation feeds into the management and into the impact assessments, and all of the processes of the convention are in fact all linked to one another and are meant to help each other. And so I think looking at our sort of state of conservation reports of the recent years in the region is also going to help us, in addition to periodic reporting, inform the priorities and decisions for the future. So I think that's very important, and I look forward as well to the next presentation on the 25th of March. Now, I think we can briefly open the floor for questions. If there are a lot of them, we may answer them in writing after the fact. But if you have anything, please write them in the chat. I don't know, Michelle, do we have anything that has stood out so far? I've seen a lot of exchanges in the chat today.
There have been a fair amount of questions. Many of them have already been answered by folks in chat. I believe there was one on tentative list, which I think we can answer separately or last, since it is not necessarily directly related to inscribed World Heritage. I'm just browsing through.
Okay.
No, I believe we've answered most of the questions. I think the one reoccurring theme is will our participants be able to see the presentations?
The answer is, of course, yes. We will share them with the national focal points, and as always, with all preceding 12 sessions, they will be strongly encouraged to share them with the site managers and with all of the other stakeholders who fill out the questionnaire. If you have any questions that come to you after the fact, please don't hesitate to send us an email, and we will answer them very happily. And if you need, especially for the national focal points, you can use as well the Teams platform to ask the questions, and we can provide you answers through the platform as well. If there is nothing else, and if no one has any questions, I think I can hand over to Fang for some concluding words.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anatole. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention and participation in today's session. A bit long, for 2 hours or more, but I think the subject is very important. A special word of thanks to our colleagues from the advisory bodies, Richard, Eugene, and Mizuki, and also Marie-Noël from wh for their presentations and inputs. The presentations and the discussions today are very important for the World Heritage National Focal Point and the site managers who are ensuring the daily management of culture, nature, and mixed sites. Apart from the periodical reporting exercise, I think the theory and practice relating to management planning and impact assessments are also important components for the protection and management of World Heritage Sites as well as in the process of preparing World Heritage nominations. So therefore, I hope that this comprehensive training could help you in your daily work for the implementation of the World Heritage Convention. I would like to thank you all for your active participation in these sessions, which we hope have been helpful to you, not only to fill out the questionnaire, but also to shed some light on the key aspects of World Heritage conservation. As a final reminder, the reviewers are currently looking at the Section 1 questionnaire, and we will start looking into Section 2 questionnaire after the early completion deadline at end of March. In this process, they may reach out to you individually if needed, but please do not hesitate to contact the PR team at the address indicated in the chart if you have any question. Additionally, I think in early February, we produced an information note on the periodical reporting exercise for the whole region. I hope that you have received this copy, and there is a summary of all the progress made so far. We have only 2 sessions left as part of the series. A question and answer session ahead of the early completion deadline for Section 2, which will be fit on the 11th of March. And another one on urban heritage and sustainable development for World Heritage on 25th of March, just 1 month after this session, which will conclude the 15-part capacity building series on the occasion of the 3rd cycle of periodical reporting for the Asia-Pacific region. So thank you very much for your commitment to this important exercise under the World Heritage Convention. And I look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.